Hello, and welcome to this presentation on translation quality management. We're taking a look in this presentation at some overall methodologies related to managing the quality of translations, especially when thinking about the fact that the idea of quality in translation is such a fuzzy one. No two translators are going to produce the same translation of a text, and that doesn't mean that either translation is wrong, though there may be errors in whatever translation has been produced. But really, this is just natural human variation. Each person has their own way of doing things. And so when different people have different ideas about quality, it's important to come together and harmonize around what quality means for a specific organization. This becomes even more important in this era of generative AI, where people are getting LLMs more and more involved in the translation process. So there too, we need to be sure that we are ensuring that there's quality in the translations that are being produced. In this lesson, we're going to take a broad overview of what is quality management. We'll look at that idea as an input process output chain to get started. After that, we'll take a look at some of the concepts related to quality management systems. We'll go ahead and define those concepts as well. We're going to take a look at the topics of holistic quality, taking the quality of a document as a whole, while also comparing that to the activity of identifying individual errors within a translation. And then we'll take a look at strategies for improving quality as well. Okay, so starting off with this idea of quality management being an input process output chain. Essentially, when we do translation, you have an input. The input is the source text for translation, plus any references that have been provided that the translator should follow. The process is that highly qualified translators do the translation sometimes, and actually quite often now people are, of course, getting automatic translation systems involved in doing that process of translation. And then we have the output, and the quality evaluation is performed on the output to make sure that the translation does what we want it to do. Putting all of these things together, we get really good results if we have processes that have been well defined with really good resources, specifications for how we want things done. And then if we're going through cycles of ongoing quality evaluations where we're incorporating lessons learned into future projects that we do. When we think about quality management, it's important to note that really the entire production process when we're doing translation and localization is quality management, because as you'll see in the next slide, quality planning is a part of quality management. However, at the same time, we have specific processes within the translation workflow that are quality management proper, like the editing stage where somebody takes a look at the translation that has been produced, or a proofreading stage, or if localization is happening, those in-context reviews where the content that has been incorporated into a localized design is then checked to make sure that everything is functional, that the text fits as it should within the space that has been provided. And yeah, so the workflow can be pretty complex, and every part of it really is quality management. You want everyone trying to meet quality thresholds for their stage in order for the next person or technology in the process to be able to do their work well as well. Within quality management systems, and according to ISO 9001 on quality, these are the components of a quality management system. There's quality planning, control, evaluation, assurance, and improvement. As I discussed in the previous slide, quality planning is all of these activities that we do in order to make sure that we have good processes, or that we're setting ourselves up to deliver good results. So this includes things like setting specifications for the work to be performed so that we are just getting what we want out of the process. Quality control would be those steps within the process that are designed specifically to check and make sure that whatever product is developing is being developed in the way that we want to. We want to do quality control at strategic steps in the workflow or strategic places in the workflow in order to catch errors that are easier to fix upstream and that become much more difficult to fix the further downstream that they're passed. When we look at quality evaluation, that's the process of determining if the product that we've developed meets the expectations that were set forth at the start of the workflow in specifications. Quality assurance includes auditing processes to make sure that everyone is following the instructions that have been established. And then quality improvement is the ongoing optimizations that happen to the overall system to make sure that the system just gets better and better over time. So in thinking about quality control and quality evaluation, editors are the first people to check if the translation meets the requirements that we set in the specification. So there's the TEP process generally that organizations follow when doing translation workflows where you have translation, editing, and proofreading. The editor is generally checking for things like accuracy in the rendering of meaning, and to make sure that stylistic elements of the text meet style guidelines and things like that. An important note that we should keep in mind is that when we're giving editors instructions about how to conduct their task, we want to make sure that preferential changes are not being made. Ray Valido calls this happy to glad type changes, where somebody decides that they like a synonym a little bit more, and so they think they need to change the translation. That's not the point of the system. If the translation is fine, nothing should be changed about it. Then another thing that we have to be aware of is just how problematic it is to say something like the editors should check for accuracy and meaning. Accuracy is highly, highly dependent upon the context for which the work is produced. If the translation doesn't follow an appropriate strategy, it may be accurate from a linguistic perspective, but inaccurate from the standpoint of stylistics. So it's important to note that accuracy always has to be tied to things like specifications, terminology, style guidelines, and the like. It's also important to note that no translator and no translation is going to be entirely accurate. This is just the nature of language work. When you're taking content that was written in one language system, one cultural system, there will always be aspects of meaning that are lost and aspects of meaning that are gained in the act of translation. So what we want to have the editors do is check for accuracy according to the specifications, where they're taking into account, okay, listen, not all of the senses that were conveyed in the source text can be conveyed in the target text. And so did the person performing this task before me or the machine performing this task before me prioritize the senses that were necessary given the specifications in the target translation? We also have to note that no translation is ever going to be entirely impartial. Human beings are not able to completely eliminate their subjectivity. There's always going to be unconscious bias that people bring to their tasks. And this is part of the reason that we have workflows where multiple people are checking a translation to make sure that it does what we intend for it to do. And so given all of this fuzziness around quality and the task of editing and the task of evaluating, it's important to give people a framework via which they can judge a translation that is a little less subjective and a little less preferential. That being said, when we're passing translations to the editing step or to an evaluation step, the person performing that task of checking is going to be looking at translation quality on two planes. First of all, we need to look for the whole holistic quality of a document, the quality of a translation as a whole. Now, there's two dimensions here that are being presented as part of holistic quality. These include correspondence to the source text, where again, full 100% correspondence is not possible. So we want to make sure that correspondence prioritizes the parts of the message that we want to prioritize. On the other side, we have readability, and this is looking at, does the content read well as a standalone document? And here it's super important to note that literal translations are not the way to achieve readability. Literal translations, in fact, cloud correspondence as well. So if you have a literal translation where somebody's reading it and they don't quite understand what it means because it's not being expressed, the text isn't expressing ideas in a way that is natural, then that affects both readability scores and correspondence scores. On the other side, we're looking at analytic quality, where we're checking for individual errors within the translated document. So we're checking for things like terminology, accuracy, linguistic conventions, style, locale conventions, and audience appropriateness. These categories of errors that are being presented here are from the multi-dimensional quality metrics. It's a standard that's being incorporated to a lot of different technologies for doing evaluations and annotating translations. So it's important to be aware of these error categories as well. When we're looking at determining what are the errors within a text, we also need to determine things like what's the severity of the error. And so according to the MQM framework, there are these levels of severity. We can have neutral or preferential changes that maybe somebody within the requesting organization just wanted to make the translation sound more like their own. It didn't mean that there was something wrong with the translation, just that somebody had a preference that maybe they forgot to express at the start of the project, or that's just coming to mind now that they're reviewing the project. Minor errors are errors that don't impact understandability and usability. Major errors do impact understandability and readability. Critical errors are errors that are going to do pretty severe reputational and physical damage. So those are the ones that we want to avoid the most. When we're thinking about scoring translations reliably, we also have to be aware of two ideas that are presented here: intra-rater reliability and inter-rater reliability. These are things that can be hard to achieve, but that are super important, because if we don't have reliability in the evaluations that are taking place, that's going to introduce noise into our system, where people in systems performing translation are going to get contradictory information from the evaluations that took place. So these aspects of reliability are important. Intra-rater reliability is how reliably, how consistently a single person evaluates translations over time. To explain this, I like to give the example of, on a Monday morning when I'm getting back to work after having the weekend, maybe I'm feeling a little tired, I'm feeling a little crabby, and so I might be more demanding in the evaluations that I perform. On the other hand, when I get to Friday, it's going to be the weekend, I'm clearing the last things off my desk, I may want to work more quickly, I may be more forgiving of things that I'm seeing in a translation. So with intra-rater reliability, we're wanting individual raters, individual evaluators, to be evaluating text consistently over time. Inter-rater reliability then is how consistently does a group of people perform evaluations. If you've got 5 people on a team performing evaluations and they're all following their own systems for doing that, that obviously will introduce noise and mixed signals into all of the improvement and that we're trying to achieve. So really, it's important to note that from ISO 9001, all of these systems that have been presented very generally here are systems of plan, do, check, act, where we plan our processes, we carry out the processes, we check how well our plan performed, and then we act. We do something about the areas in which our system didn't perform as we intended it to. And then we make new plans, right? Where we try to determine, okay, I had to fix these things last time because my system didn't take a certain aspect of linguistic transfer into account. This time when I run the project, I do want to take that into account. So I'm going to modify something about the plan that I followed last time. And then I'm just going to go through that cycle over and over again until, I get the results that were intended. Finally, I just wanted to emphasize that this whole workflow that you see here is quality management. Starting a workflow with specifications, which is a requirement of ASTM F2575 on translation, performing translation. First, we need specifications. Then we need a quote that adequately provides a budget and time to perform the translation up to standards. Then we prepare the project once the quote has been approved, putting together all of the resources that people are going to need to do the translation, including pre-editing the source text or flagging areas of the source text where it's going to cause issues in translation due to ambiguity, due to cultural differences, those sorts of things. And then we actually go through the production process where people are doing their steps, they're doing translation, they're doing editing, they're doing, proofreading, going on to localization, and the reviews that follow before finally delivering and then doing that post-production task of having a post-mortem where we're trying to determine, okay, did the system overall produce the results that we intended it to? Though really the cycles of plan, do, check, act should be happening at every single stage of the workflow. All right, so that's it for this presentation on translation quality management. Thanks so much.